Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Aligned Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Torrie Thompson, and I am so excited this week to dive into the world of parasites. We've been going through the various root causes, and so far we've talked about mold mycotoxins, environmental toxins, and now we're going to start diving into the gut and going over things like parasites. So, one misconception here is that we don't have them here in America, and so people don't talk about them, and they don't talk about the possible symptoms and how common they are, where they come from, and so that is what we're going to do. We're going to dive into all of that, going through where you pick them up, what you can do, what symptoms to look for, all of that. So really, what are parasites and where do they come from? So a parasite is unlike a virus or bacteria in that a parasite needs a host, something to live in to survive. A bacteria can live out of a host, right? You can have a virus that can live out of a host and then be picked up by another host. However, a parasite has to have a host to survive. And one of the reasons is they need us to get food, to get their form of survival comes from us or whatever their host is. So they need us to survive. And then the majority of parasites are microscopic organisms, about 70 to 80%. There are guys that we've seen, right? Tapeworms, pinworms, roundworms, hookworms that you can see, but the majority of them are microscopic. So there are a few types of parasites out there. We've got the protozoa, which are single cell, basically one single cell microscopic little guy, and that would be things like Giardia, commonly from dogs, Blasto, Toxoplasma, commonly from cats. You can't see those. There's no way you would know, and so again, you would need a microscope to be able to detect that. Then we have helminths, which are some of the worms. Some of these are the big guys, right? You've got tapeworms and flukes. We've got pinworms. So some of these can be seen. A lot of them do have microscopic or very, very small stages of life that we couldn't see, but the actual worm itself can be visible. And then there are external parasites, and these are things like lice and scabies, mites, that kind of stuff that live outside of us, not inside of our body. So probably the most common myth that we see is that we cannot get them here in America. So how do we get infected? Of course, there is traveling abroad, right? Going to a developing country, you may pick it up through food, water, that kind of stuff. But here in America, the most common sources are probably food and water. So did you drink water that was contaminated with some sort of parasite? And then food. So some of the big foods that we look for would be sushi. Raw fish is notorious for tons of parasites. And I know people say sushi is frozen. There's no chance that you're going to get parasites from frozen fish. Well, that's if they actually froze it at a temperature that killed them. A lot of these guys can just go into a dormant state. And then as soon as it comes back to temperature, there they are back active again. And it has to be frozen for a set amount of time. And there are places that cut corners. And so it is not foolproof. There's no way you can say my sushi was previously frozen to prevent this. There's no chance. That is not true at all. So we've got sushi. We've got pork. Undercooked pork is a very, very common way to get parasites. We've got raw vegetables, so food that's grown in soil. It can even be fruit, and that has crevices, right? So things like lettuce and broccoli, those they have little crevices that these guys can get into from the soil. Then you eat it, and there you go. Undercooked fish, salmon is a big one, but really any undercooked fish that's not cooked thoroughly through can be a source of parasites. And then undercooked meat. So pork, again, being the biggest, but any undercooked meat has the potential to have parasites. Then we have pets, and we all think our pets are great, but they are a big source of parasites. I actually had to do a parasite cleanse in my house for all dogs and us because we had one dog that had gotten a tapeworm. So pets can carry them. So some of them get passed through saliva. And if they kiss your face, some of them can be passed through stool, and then you're walking around barefoot and can get it. It can be from them sleeping in your bed. Pets are notorious. Then we have cats. Cats can carry Toxoplasma, which is a very nasty parasite that can get into the brain. And so again, getting your pets dewormed frequently can be a good source to make sure that you're not getting parasites through them. Walking around barefoot, like we talked about, of course, can be your own pets, but it can be other animals that are in your backyard, and going to the bathroom there that can have parasites. And a lot of these guys will have these little nymphs that come out, and you'll actually sometimes can see them in stool if they're big enough. But then you'll get something like a flea that will eat it. The dog gets fleas, and then the dog gets a parasite from that. So there are very common ways, but again, it doesn't always have to be through your pets. It can just be from animals in your backyard. You're walking around barefoot and they get in. Then it can be bug bites. So again, these bugs can carry parasites. So it can be fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, anything that can bite has the potential to hold parasites. And then it can be person-to-person contact. So we see this a lot with like kids in schools, shared bathrooms, biting our fingernails, especially if you're a gardener or with little kids. Biting your fingernails, you can get anything that's underneath those nails can now get into your mouth. So these guys are amazing at getting in. We often can't see them, so you have no idea that you're ingesting them. And then they have amazing survival capabilities once they get into our body to survive stomach acid, to survive all of the mechanisms that our body has. And something I get a lot of kickback on the internet in particular is people will say, well, we have stomach acid, so that's why the stomach acid will kill these parasites. And in theory, that would be great, but these parasites are amazing at evolving and evading our body's natural mechanisms because they need us to survive. And so they get pretty darn good at figuring out how do we get around this so that we can survive. So they may go into a dormant little cyst that's got a protective little shell around it so that the parasite itself doesn't get taken out by stomach acid. Some of them go into a dormant stage. So there's ways that these guys do it to evade our body's natural defense systems so that they just go in undetected and then just start wreaking havoc. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of parasites? So everyone thinks of these shows where someone all of a sudden loses a ton of weight, right? Oh my gosh, I lose a ton of weight. That can be a problem, but I will say when I picked up a parasite, I got a tapeworm in Asia years ago, I gained weight. My body got very, very inflamed and I actually gained weight from a parasite. So it doesn't always have to be that you're going to lose weight. We see a lot of skin issues, right? So rashes and little like acne and bumps can be a big piece. We can see hives, we can see itching. We've got digestive issues. So whether it's a lot of bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, some sort of change to the gut. We can have nutrient deficiencies, and this is very common. They eat our nutrients. So we often see things like iron tank. We often see things like magnesium tank. We see the food that they like often comes down. And so if all of a sudden your iron tanks, could be something that's in there munching it and eating it. So worth looking into parasites. Then we see food cravings. These guys love sugar. They love certain foods. So we may notice all of a sudden you're really, really hungry. You're craving things. That can be a sign that there are some parasites there. Sleep disturbances. We often see that they'll wake you up from 2 to 4 a.m. If you're waking up every night around the same time, it can be these parasites. It can be super specific things like having an itching butt at night. That can be a sign of pinworms. It also can be things like insomnia, depression, anxiety, mood swings, that kind of stuff. These guys are great at creating a multitude of symptoms. Some people have some people have none. So just because you don't have any or anything that you're perceiving doesn't mean they're not there. So how do these guys evade the immune system? Doesn't the immune system just go, hey, look, we've got a problem, let's go kill it? Well, parasites are a type of organism that creates something called biofilm. Biofilm to me is fascinating because it is another way these guys have learned to evolve. So biofilm is the slimy layer that they will secrete around themselves, and they basically will live under it. So what happens is it's a barrier between the immune system and the parasites. So the immune system will go by and it's like, hey, I think we've got a problem, but I can't find it. And so they will live basically like rent-free in this biofilm layer, totally protected, and the immune system can't do a darn thing. It's also why people will go do like little parasite cleanses, things get temporarily better, and then they will all of a sudden come back with a vengeance, right? They haven't gotten through that biofilm layer, so things just kind of pop back up once you take the killing power out. They also, how do these guys evade? They also will, they have different life cycles, right? So they have like eggs and cysts, and they go through these different life cycles. And so a lot of times either antiparasitics or protocols are too short that you miss part of the life cycle, and then they just keep ramping back up. And then these parasites, what they'll do is they will actually produce ammonia. They produce ammonia as a byproduct, and then so we'll have these high amounts of ammonia. When there's ammonia in the body, it tells the blood-brain barrier to open up, and now we've got the gut open, the blood-brain barrier open, and so things can move around. So these guys evade really well. They really wreak havoc in the body, and a lot of times just totally undetected. So it should be simple, right? Let's just go test for parasites and then clean the gut out. But unfortunately, there's not great testing for parasites. Traditional testing doesn't pick them up the majority of the time. We use stool testing, and the problem with stool testing is you have to have gotten lucky that in the part of the stool test that you submitted, because you don't submit the whole thing, that you got a piece of the parasite or DNA of the parasite, and they don't like to leave, right? They're going to be in that biofilm layer, so often we don't get them. So stool testing definitely have their pros and cons. If you get parasites, then amazing. We also can look for something called fecal eosinophils through a stool test, which just means the immune reaction to parasites. So again, if the immune system is aware of them, you may see that. But we often get clean stool tests even though there could be parasites there. So just because you had a stool test that said you're A-okay does not always mean so. You can look through the blood, and so you can look for eosinophils through your blood. It's just in a CBC. So if you have elevated levels of eosinophils, that can indicate parasites. And then you can go through symptoms, right? Is there symptoms that would lead to maybe there's some parasites here? So again, none of these are foolproof. You do have to, you do have to kind of put pieces together, and there's things that you can do to kind of write the story. So this might be something like doing a stool test plus blood plus an organic acid. So you can look for in a comprehensive stool test, you'd want something with PCR. This is going to look for the DNA and the parasite. So hopefully you can get one of them. So if you might get a parasite there, you could also do a little bit of blood and see if eosinophils are there, and then you could do something like an organic acid test. And while organic acids don't look for parasites themselves, they look for signs of them. In an organic acids test, we can look for things like high ammonia, which parasites produce. We can look for high lactic acid and high pyruvic acid, both things that parasites produce. So sometimes you just have to kind of write the story based off multiple tests, kind of getting clues from each. And sometimes you go, you know what, let's just do a parasite or a gut cleanse and see if we get any better. So when you decide, okay, I want to do a parasite cleanse, or I think this is one of my issues, what do you do? So you have to approach it in a few different ways. The first is going on an anti-inflammatory diet. So making sure you're not eating sugar, processed foods, pulling out anything that could feed these guys and just eating true whole foods. And then what we want to do is really go in and support detoxification. So supporting the liver, the kidneys, the gallbladder, making sure the body can move these out without causing more stress. Then what you want to do is go in and add some killers. So in the herbal realm, you'll see a lot of like 7-day parasite cleanses or 21-day or 14-day. And unfortunately, these are often not long enough to do a full gut cleanse. It often is going to take a few months. And that's just to make sure that you got all the life cycles, that we got all of the organisms there, and that we've actually cleared them. We're not just kind of taking out a phase and then they're going to pop back up once the eggs hatch or something like that. And then you're going to want to use usually blends of herbs. So something like wormwood or black walnut, clove, mimosa pudica. There's all these different ways to do it, but you generally want to have blends together. And I always recommend working with someone. I don't like people going through this stuff by themselves just because you can have big die-off reactions, or sometimes people don't do well with certain blends. So I do recommend finding a practitioner that can walk you through what supplements to take, what support, because often you'll see a parasite cleanse on the internet, but there's no support in it, right? They're not supporting detox pathways or your gut or all the things that could be affected. So you really want to have someone that knows what they're doing, that can walk you through it, and is taking into account detox pathways, lymphatic system, your minerals, hydration, gut support, all of that stuff. It's so important. So when you start detoxing parasites, something that people on the internet love to do is talk about these giant worms that they've detoxed. The reality is, because most of these guys are microscopic, you are not going to actually see them. Most of the time, what people are seeing through parasite cleanses is that biofilm that they live under. So you may see that, and there are possibilities that you could see a parasite, right? But they are not that common, especially here. Having things like tapeworms are not that common. And so, before you freak out and think that you have this huge worm, it's often just the biofilm that they're living under. But that does mean that whatever's living under there is often going away as well. You're often detoxing that out and killing those guys. So just because you don't see anything or you see biofilm, that does not mean there's no parasites there. Again, they're mostly microscopic. So it's one of my biggest pet peeves is seeing people using biofilm as marketing, saying, look at these giant parasites. 99% of them are not parasites. It's just the slime layer that they live under. And again, you really can't see these guys too often. So what do you do if you do a parasite cleanse? Do you have to do them all the time? How does that work? So what I recommend is if you do a big cleanse, right, you do some big long detox, then I usually recommend doing like a once a year little parasite cleanse. For me, I do them every January. Every January, I do a little parasite cleanse, and that's so that I can kind of make sure anything I've picked up is good. My good is set for this year. Then if I travel, if I go to Mexico or I go somewhere new, I usually will take my supplements, my parasite supplements while I'm there, and then I'll do a little bit of a cleanse when I get home. And that way I can kind of make sure that I didn't pick up anything and that it doesn't turn into a bigger issue. So I'll take it while I'm there, and then I'll carry that with me home. I make sure that, my pets, we deworm them twice a year. We make sure that they're on supplements and stuff to support their immune system. And then I'm really good about supporting my own immune system. So making sure that I have adequate amounts of vitamin D and C and all that. My immune system's strong so that I do have a little bit of a fighting shot. And that my gut is in great shape, right? So I eat probiotic-rich foods. I eat a very clean diet, drinking filtered water, keeping my minerals up. My gut is in tip-top shape. Again, just to give me the best shot against some of these guys. So it's not something to be afraid of. People love to make parasites out to be these horrific things. And yes, they can be, but they're very much just kind of part of the world that we live in. We can detox them and kill them, and they are preventable to a certain extent if you take precautions. I personally don't do sushi very often. I definitely don't do pork that's anything but well done. I am very, very careful about my fish. Everything is well done. So you can kind of lower the load, wash all your vegetables, soak them, make sure there's nothing coming in that way. So you can lower your risks. And again, just doing parasite cleanses every now and again, just to make sure that you are set. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little mini episode on parasites. They are fascinating. I think people love to put them as the only root cause, and I actually don't really think they are the only root cause. I actually think there's bigger things. And if you look at something like a mold mycotoxin, they're usually the reason parasites can have legs, if you will. So something like mold, mycotoxins will bring the immune system down, which makes it perfect for a parasite to overgrow. So if you are suspecting parasites, I often encourage people to look at the full picture. Are there mold mycotoxins? Are there environmental toxins? What else are you dealing with? Because I think parasites can be a root cause, but they're usually not the only root cause, and there's usually something deeper. So I encourage you to look at all avenues. And then thank you again for listening. If you enjoy this, please subscribe, write a review. And then if you guys have any topics that you want hit, let me know. And I will see you guys next week.